I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is a case that will make you angry. Now, no one died, no one was murdered, but the allegations are horrific and the alleged victims were the most vulnerable. Here's the story. In the remote woods outside of Fort White, Florida, a harrowing secret unraveled. Brian and Jill Griffeth and their adult children, Dallin and Liberty, were arrested on July 22, 2025 on charges of aggravated child abuse after authorities removed 9 children, 5 biological and 4 privately adopted from Arizona. The adopted and foster children, ages 7 to 16, were allegedly systematically abused, locked in makeshift plywood cages under bunk beds, beaten with canes, sprayed in the face with vinegar, denied education, medicated without prescription, and instructed to lie about life inside their mobile home. The abuse only came to light after a mandatory reporter at their LDS church in Branford raised alarm when a child arrived at camp armed with a real stun gun, a red flag that triggered investigators to uncover years of silence. All 4 Griffith adults remain jailed on a $500,000 bond each. A 10th foster child was safely returned to biological parents in Arizona, highlighting the cross-state adoption path that masked this alleged nightmare. This is bad. This is really bad. You know, a lot of times in some of these cases, authorities don't find out what's happening until a life is gone. So the one small ray of light in all of this is that this behavior was discovered before the loss of life. But the life that these children were living is nothing I would wish on any child. Take a listen as Cody Thomas, Court TV field reporter, takes us through some of these horrific allegations.
During the interview of the children by DCF, various forms of child abuse were discovered. Accusations of the adopted children being beaten with a cane by Brian and also locked in their bedrooms by Brian and the other adults. As a result of the allegations of physical abuse, DCF investigators obtained a court order to remove all of the children from the home. Over the next few days, Child Protection Team investigators conducted interviews with all 9 of the children. During these interviews, allegations by the children included being caged under the bunk bed by screwing in plywood to prevent his escape, being forced to lie on the floor by the mother Jill, and having her place a sheet of plywood on top of the child's body and press down on them, resulting in splinters and pain, being sprayed in the face with vinegar as a form of punishment, being given non-prescribed medication, being instructed to lie about what happens at home, and not being taken to or provided with adequate schooling to read or write.
It's not one child. We're talking about 9 children were in this home, right? Then there were adult children there as well. 2 of them have been charged in the case. 14 people in this house. And it goes on apparently for years. And that brings us to the first question in our investigation. All this alleged abuse, all these kids, why didn't anyone know this was going on? How was this kept secret? Here to help answer that question, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who is in Florida tonight, and author and nationally certified mental health counselor Sharonda Brown. Great to have you both here. All right, Cody, you are in Florida. You were walking the grounds today. What can you tell us about the area where these children were living? And I say living, I mean maybe being tortured, but where they were residing.
Right, Vinny, just horrible allegations coming out of that mobile home here in Fort White, Florida. This is a very rural area. The nearest city is Gainesville, and we're about an hour outside of Gainesville. This place is very, we're kind of in the countryside of Florida out here. You pass a bunch of farmland heading here from Gainesville. There's not really much. You don't see almost any street lights, any security cameras, anything of that nature. And in fact, the mobile home sits on a dirt road. Take a look at the lay of the land right here. So we're right here in Fort White, Florida. This is the city, the suburb of Gainesville, Florida, where everything went down in this Griffith case of felony child abuse. And if you look around me, you can see it's pretty secluded and it's pretty rural, if you couldn't tell by the dirt road that I'm standing on. You can't see there are no cameras actually. There's no street lights, it's just electric lines, light poles, not many neighbors. Again, very secluded, very rural. But on the topic of seclusion, if you look over here behind me, you'll see this long driveway. What's down that driveway? That's the mobile home where the Griffiths lived. 14 people and one 3-bed, 2-bath mobile home. 2 parents, Jill and Brian Griffith, 2 adult children, Dallin Griffith and Liberty Griffith, and 9, count it, 9 minor children, 4 of which were adopted or fostered. Now, you look behind me, you can't see anything. All you can see is this mailbox and leading into the driveway. You can't see the house, you can't see anything at all. Now that leaves open the question, is that why neighbors didn't report anything? Simply because they literally could not see anything going on as far as the abuse happening to these young children? Questions that need answers. But again, this is down here, suburb of Gainesville, Florida, Fort White. This is where everything happened here on Boundary Way. And Vinnie, you saw there, that house tucked away in that very rural part of town, part of Fort White, away from everything, secluded from everyone, and away from any wandering eyes that might have any questions about what was going on if they saw something going on in that yard or in that home.
Middle of nowhere. Like, Gainesville is not a huge metropolis itself, and you're an hour outside of that. How about the Department of Child Services? Did you have an opportunity to speak with anyone there? Was this family on the radar?
So, Vinnie, I did reach out to the Department of Children and Families down here in Florida. I wanted to get an idea of what it was like initially to move from Arizona across state lines to Florida, and then also what protocols that they have in place to try to prevent abuse like this from happening with adopted and foster families. But they did decline an interview, but they sent me a reply and a statement that said, the department conducts investigations concerning all allegations of abuse, neglect, or abandonment in Florida. Information regarding investigations is confidential per section 39.202 of the Florida statute. So again, Vinnie, this investigation is ongoing. There is a limited amount of information that they can give at this time, but that was their statement regarding that family in this case.
All right, Sharonda Brown, we heard the allegations. Cody's gone through what these children were allegedly going through. First line of defense that I think a lot of children have when they're being abused at home is school. A teacher sees something, or the child may say something that the teacher's like, well, we'll follow up on, and then they report, information. These children weren't even going to school. How does that happen in our system where you've got nine children? Nobody's going to school.
Yeah, when you cross state lines, and depending on what happened with the cases, like if they were granted adoption or if they were even granted guardianship, you can still have kids that were granted guardianship in foster care. Then no one's really going to ask the questions because you've really passed all the tests if you've gotten that part. They've done the home visits, they've done the supervision, they've done the 90 days trial home placements, right? So there are a lot of things that happen that will make these go under the radar. And then if you're not putting them in school and you're isolating them, let's say when they moved over into state lines, they didn't even register them for school, so they don't even really know that this exists, which it sounds like how this ended up coming out in the way that it did, because they were in a social setting at some point and something came up. But if you want to control people, the best thing to do is to isolate them and keep them under the radar. I think it makes it easier for you to continue to abuse them if there's no name, because people seem to think that no news is good news. So if they don't hear about it, then it's not happening.
Yeah, and you talk about where they chose to live. As Cody's pointed out, isolated from everything. Even in this isolated community, you're isolated from them as well. 14 people in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. That's something also. You mentioned, Sharonda, the way this was uncovered was one of the children was at an LDS camp. So I don't know if other children were able to go to this camp, but if you've been subjected to this type of abuse and you're a child, why, when you have an opportunity to speak to someone else at church or somewhere else, would you not speak out about what was happening at home?
The most common reason most people do not speak out about abuse is because they have a fear of death or losing their life. By the time that they've been abused and let out the house, they've already been convinced, hey, if I tell someone something or if I share something, the abuse is going to get worse or something's going to happen, because you run the risk of people not believing you. You run the risk of someone going back to the adult and saying, hey, I heard this, or they told me this. And now you run that risk of either losing your life or being abused more. So it's easier for the person being abused to just stay quiet and not say anything. So it may end up coming out in behaviors or any other type of demeanor such as this one. And it makes other people pose questions like, okay, that's not right. Now let's look into this. And it's easier when it's done that way, because now the kids are protected before they are questioned.
And what are your thoughts about just the general living conditions? This is a mobile home. It's not huge. It's been described as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but you had 14 people there, right? You had the 4 adults who got arrested. There's another adult or older child who was not arrested, and then you had 9 children, 5 biological, 4 of the foster adoptive nature. And we're looking at the outside of the home here. What are your thoughts about how this even happened? Like, I guess you don't have to run it by anyone, you know, what your living conditions are, I guess, when you move out of state and you've adopted the children already. But this is insanity, this many people in that small of a space.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not interested in providing care or concern, you're not really concerned about how much square footage is in a home. The other piece, too, is that when you put people in survival situations where they are competing for space, it makes it easier to control them, because now you can make one feel better than the other. You can pin them against each other. And so now everybody is abusing each other, because now it's for the fittest of the survival, you know, the survival of the fittest, shall I say. And that's really common. People will put you in situations in which the rooms are small or the home is small, because now they can make you guys compete for the resources. So that's a very common tactic for abusers.
Yeah, and you know, people have different means. I understand some homes are bigger, smaller, and you know, you shouldn't limit a family based upon how much money they have, but it wasn't just their family. They're going out and bringing children into the family through adoption and fostering, and those children deserve a fair shake and not to be thrown into a situation like that. Okay, Sharonda and Cody are going to stay with us. Coming up next, why was there a cage behind the Griffiths' mailbox?
We live in a small town. We live in a safe community. Things like this are not something that we see all the time.
Matriarch of the Adelson family gets arrested.
Terrible. Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law, Dan Markell.
Prosecutors say a bitter child custody battle was the motive for the murder-for-hire plot.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
Now that the ship is really sinking fast, blood doesn't matter that much.
The Matriarch Mastermind murder trial. Live coverage begins August 19th, only on Court TV.
We live in a small town. We live in a safe community, and you know, we have things that go on here just like anywhere across the country. You know, there's things that may be routine for us that may be news to some other citizens who aren't exposed to the things we see on a daily basis. But things like this are not something that we see all the time. When it does have a tendency to resonate throughout the community just because of the details that we know of, that we have shared publicly. You know, those tug at the heartstrings of anyone with a conscience.
And you know, a small town like that should be a great place to raise kids and to raise foster kids, right? Living out in the country, everyone's looking out for each other. Life is simple but very safe. Great way for a family to be even closer to one another as you rely on each other for everything. That's heartbreaking. Okay, you're sitting down. So obviously, Cody and our crew down there in Florida, just outside the house, take a look at what they saw behind the mailbox. Yeah, this isn't an illusion. You were looking at a cage. You're looking at a cage. And it seems to be relatively similar to what's been described by police in this case. That's right at the outside of their property, by the mailbox on the road to the entrance to that dirt pathway that goes back to the mobile home. Wow. All right. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Why was there a cage behind the Griffiths' mailbox? What's the story behind that cage? Here to help with our investigation, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas is still with us down in Florida, and joining us, private investigator TJ Ward. All right, Cody, did your jaw drop when you saw it? And describe exactly where it was, how big it is, and what you noticed.
Vinny, I think you hit the nail on the head there just a few seconds ago, talking about being down here in a small town where people should be caring for each other. I mean, on this dirt road, there are only about 5 homes there, so you'd imagine all of them know each other. But then, you know, we're walking around, I'm looking around, getting a lay of the land, looking at the scape of the neighborhood here, and it was, you know, after I'd found out where the house was, I looked right behind the mailbox, Vinny. I mean, the mailbox is sitting right on this dirt road, and sitting directly behind it, maybe 2 or 3 feet, was that cage. And of course, I looked to Paul, our photographer. I'm like, Paul, that has to be it. Like that could be the cage. I mean, the hefty part of these allegations is locking these young minors in a cage. And then, Vinny, we know that these cages that they talked about on the bunk beds involved plywood. What do you see? You see right there on your screen, this aluminum steel looking cage surrounded by this plywood in kind of a, you know, a crisscross pattern, as one would put, to put someone in a cage. Like, by all accounts, this could be that cage. And Vinny, it's kind of just eerie thinking about that there could have been, you know, a small child in that cage. I mean, it looked about the size of what you'd put a puppy in, like, you know, a Labrador retriever in or something like that. Like, it was big enough to put a small child in for sure.
Okay, and what is law enforcement saying about the kids being placed in cages?
Well, Vinny, according to the redacted charge report, they, of course, you know, outlined the horrendous allegations. They interviewed, DCF interviewed some of the children talking about these abuse allegations. And in that redacted charge report, it's on the account of this 14-year-old, one of the victims. It says, redacted, who is 14 years old, was interviewed first. Redacted reports being in the 4th grade. Redacted was unable to provide his date of birth and appears to have limited literacy skills. During Redacted's interview, he made several disclosures. Redacted stated that he would be caged under the bottom of the bunk bed, either by his mother, father, or some of the other kids. Just real bad stuff here, Vinny. Redacted's bed was photographed by DCF at the time of the children's custody intake. Redacted's bed is the bottom bunk of a 3-tier bunk bed, with 3 2x4s secured horizontally across the front, restricting access to the bed to only one entrance at the head of the bed. Redacted explained that a piece of plywood is placed over the entrance to his bed and screwed in, preventing him from getting out. He also mentioned that even if he needed to use the bathroom at night, he might be made to wait until the following day. Again, Vinny, horrendous allegations, and it made it just that much more eerie, that much more spooky, you know, seeing that cage in person right there behind the mailbox. Of course, this charge report talks about the bunk beds, but who's to say that that cage there behind the mailbox wasn't used for some other abuse as well in that home?
Yeah. TJ, what are your thoughts here? If this cage is part of the abuse, would law enforcement have seized it, or would they just document it with photographs? What are your thoughts here?
Well, this is a sad situation, Vinny. this case, and I know this is a small department, and I know this department needs to deal with the law enforcement in Arizona also, but I think this case needs to go up to much higher professionals, at maybe the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office. That cage, they're not going to do anything with it at this level of law enforcement, other than take pictures and maybe take prints and something, maybe get some interviews from some of the people who may have been put in there. I mean, this is terrible for these kids, and these people need to be put away forever doing this. These kids are going to have a bad time growing up and learning what really life's about. This is terrible. And I think this case needs to get on a federal level. There's probably the federal level needs to go into Arizona too. That's probably why they fled from there, because something was getting close to them. So they decided to bring everybody to Florida. And this is a case that's gone across state lines. It could be slavery and so on and so forth. So something needs to be done here, and I think this needs to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and allow this lower law enforcement to put it up to a next level.
Yeah, TJ, you make a great point. You're talking about 2 different states involved. Are you trafficking these children from one state to the other for the purpose of abuse, for the purpose of forced labor, potentially?
Slavery.
We don't know. Whatever they were up to, whatever they're alleged to have done, did they actually move from Arizona to Florida to get out from underneath any sort of oversight as well? I think all of that is in play. Great point, TJ. We're short on time tonight, but it's so great to have you on. TJ Ward, thank you so much. Cody's going to stick around. Up next, what is law enforcement saying about this case? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the alleged abuse of 4 foster adoptive children. Investigators say they were locked in cages, kept away from school, and the victims of physical and sexual abuse. Here's the story. In a shocking case of hidden abuse, authorities discovered that the children living with Brian and Jill Griffith in rural Fort White, Florida, were enduring horrific conditions. 9 children, 4 adopted from Arizona, were allegedly locked in plywood and metal cages beneath bunk beds, beaten with canes and belts, and sprayed in the face with vinegar as punishment. They were denied medical care, forced to take unprescribed medications, and barred from attending school. Investigators say they were instructed to lie about their living conditions. The children lived in fear, deprived of basic human dignity. The abuse remained hidden until a church camp volunteer, alarmed by a child carrying a stun gun, contacted authorities. A mandatory reporter at the Griffiths' local LDS church triggered the investigation that uncovered years of silent suffering. Now Brian, Jill, and their adult children, Dallin and Liberty, face multiple child abuse charges, each being held on a $500,000 bond. There are a lot of alleged acts in all this, and I'm sure investigators are trying to piece everything together by speaking with the children to try to uncover what they were going through. Here's part from the redacted charge report where the names are taken out. Based on the testimonial, right, the interviews, and the physical evidence collected during the course of this investigation, all adults in the home were found to have been active participants in the ongoing pattern of abuse. By unlawfully caging the victim, they redact the name, a child of the age of 14. Additionally, it was discovered that Jill Griffith, this is the mother, maliciously punished 2 of the children whose names have been redacted, a child of the age of 15 by spraying vinegar in their faces. Another child whose name was redacted also indicated that his mother instructed him to lie about what happens in the house. During that child's interview, there were positive findings for child abuse and coaching. This is brutal. Now, there is a challenge here for investigators putting this case together because, you know, you're not necessarily going to have videos of what happened here. If you can get one of the adults to cooperate, you give them a deal, you get more insight into what was happening, that may happen here. But it seems like they're interviewing some of the older children, right, who have a better ability to communicate what was happening here. So we've got some information here, but obviously Cody is down in Florida getting more, and that brings us to the next question in our investigation. What is law enforcement saying about this case? I know we're in the beginning parts of this investigation. Here to help answer that question, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas on site. He's down at the sheriff's office in Florida. And also joining us, longtime attorney Rick Grundy with us as well. All right, Cody, what did they tell you about the allegations against not just the parents, but all four of these adults, two of whom are adult children of the parents here?
Well, Vinny, of course, I spoke with a spokesperson for the Columbia County Sheriff's Office, and because it's an ongoing investigation, his name is Sergeant Stephen Catchigan. He was, limited in detail about what he could tell us about the allegations, but this is what he could tell me. Take a listen.
Obviously, with the nature of it being ongoing, there are details that are limited as far as what we can share. However, what I can share is that on July the 3rd is when we got a call for assistance with the Department of Children and Family Services here in Florida, and the call was in relation to a court order to remove several children from the custody of this foster family. As a result of that investigation, DCF interviews, several allegations were made against the foster parents, and the investigation disclosed some information alleging severe abuse to several of those foster children. And that's how we became involved from the criminal investigative standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And, speaking of that abuse, are there any details you can tell us about the nature of the abuse, what was going on?
Sure. So some of the allegations involved caging a child in their bed with a piece of plywood so that that child could not get away and remove themselves from their own bed. It also involved using a piece of plywood to lay the child on the floor and put the plywood on the child's back and apply pressure as a form of punishment. Also involved some form of punishment that was spraying a bottle of vinegar in children's faces and causing their eyes and their face to burn, and some allegations of sexual abuse as well.
And Vinny, you heard Sergeant Catchigan there mention that sexual abuse. That is in relation to the adult son, Dallin Griffeth, 21 years old, who was arrested. In that redacted charge report, we spoke about a 10th victim who kind of got out. She lives now back in Arizona with her biological parents, but she's the one that told police about the sexual abuse. She said in that charge report that she would hear Dallin Griffith take some of those foster kids into the bathroom, and she'd hear funny noises coming from the bathroom. So just kind of more disgusting allegations there as far as Dallin Griffith.
Wow. All right, Rick Grundy, what are the challenges here, right? Because there's been an arrest, but now you've got to prove the case. You've got to convict the accused here. You're gathering information from relatively young children, some of them really young. They're the victims and the witnesses in this case. What are the challenges there, and how much do you need to convince a jury? Because not that the children are going to lie, but children's recollection and ability to communicate sometimes is somewhat limited in terms, especially if they're really, really young here. What are your thoughts here about the challenges and how you build a strong case?
So the challenges are all that you mentioned, but they're all rolled into a ball. So any young child who is the victim of criminal activity, particularly on their person, on their body, is extremely difficult situation for them to testify to that. It's things that they don't even understand. It involves words and acts that they don't know what they're about and how to label them necessarily. Now you take that and you add to it these children, the non-biological children of these individuals who have gone through obviously immense trauma, which is going to affect any witness' testimony, but here in a situation, again, rolled into the ball of being a young child, just multiplies it by several factors. In addition to that, I understand that part of what was going on with these kids is that they weren't getting to school. So their development, their mental development would be expected to be stunted. So you've got 3 huge strikes right off the bat for these kids being able to testify strongly. However, that having been said, it really is an individual basis. If these kids, if you have the proper interviewers with the district attorney's office who have been trained with working with children, and you can get them into that comfort zone, and you can get them in proper housing and start to heal them, you may very well find a star there. The other thing that I'm not quite clear on is that initially I was hearing them call these children adopted. Now I'm hearing them foster. Now foster is a very different thing. So
yeah, there's not a lot of clarity right now on that issue, on whether it was a private adoption, if they were fostered. One child was returned to Arizona, so there's a little bit of gray area there that we're still trying to work through. But let's do this. Cody, what did police have to say about the history of these types of cases in that area down in Florida?
Well, yeah, Vinny, I asked Sergeant Catchigan, had he ever seen anything like this? I mean, we're down here in this small town, small county, everyone knows everyone. He talked about, the worst things that they have down here, some hot pursuits sometimes. But I also asked him about what it's like when a case like this comes across his desk. How does that tug at his heartstrings? Take a listen to this.
Have you ever seen anything even close to this as far as child abuse? I mean, this is 9 children removed from one home, a 3-bedroom house. There's like 14 people in that house. Have you seen anything of this level in that regard before?
Well, when you've been in law enforcement for a long time, you think you've seen pretty much everything you can see, and then something like this comes along and you say, well, I haven't seen it all yet. And so I've certainly seen cases of severe abuse towards children. This would rank among the worst that I have heard of and seen. Just the nature of the allegations, the fact that so many children were involved in this case. It really is something that is unique in terms of what I've seen.
Talk to me about the feeling that you get when you see it. I mean, when, navigating an investigation like this, carrying out the protocols, because these are 9 minors going through, sprayed with vinegar, pressed with plywood. What's that feeling like for you as a law enforcement officer?
Well, it's gut-wrenching in law enforcement because most of us have children of our own, and so that's what our mind goes to. We think about how someone could be so cruel towards a child. And but at the same time, it reminds us of the importance of what we do to seek justice on behalf of those victims. So it motivates us as much as it tears our heart out to see any child suffering and going through things like this. It gives us that much more determination also to pursue justice on behalf of those children to make sure it never happens again.
And Vinnie, Sergeant Catchigan also told me that there is room for more charges to be filed against the Griffiths, so they could face more than just felony child abuse as this investigation continues.
Yeah. Rick, we're out of time, but in 10 seconds, do you think the feds may be brought in here because the children were moved from Arizona to Florida?
Yeah, I think, and that goes back to the question of whether these were a private adoption, perhaps from a religious organization that this family belonged to, or if they're foster children. Either way, I think it's going to be difficult to track down exactly what's gone through with these kids, and that based on their movement, it would be a good idea and hopefully will be followed up on to have the federal government involved.
Absolutely. Rick Grundy, great to see you. Thanks so much. Cody's going to stick around. Still to come. What do we know about the foster/adopted children?
Well, we certainly hope they would have gotten caught. We would prefer them to have gotten caught much sooner.
A woman's remains found scattered throughout a 3-mile area.
Now, a former naval officer stands trial accused of killing his wife.
The dismembered wife murder trial. Live coverage weekdays, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
I'm Vinnie Politan. Welcome to Closing Arguments.
What's happening here?
It's unreal. Let me show you exactly what happened.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan. Weeknights at 8/7 Central. Only on Court TV.
Well, we certainly hope they would have gotten caught. We would prefer them to have gotten caught much sooner. But I will say that because of Florida's laws, we have mandatory reporters here in Florida who are required to report allegations of abuse. And because of those safety nets in place in our state, that's how this case was really brought to light.
Yeah, everyone wishes it was sooner, but they got there before anyone died. And they got there as soon as there was some mechanism, someone saying something because they learned something about these children. It was the taser that was found at the LDS summer camp that one of the children had. Now, when they did respond, DCF, and they went to the house, the parents didn't let them wander around the house. Maybe because there were perhaps cages in the bedrooms. So they were in one area of the home. Take a look at the bottom part of this charge report, which talks about what they noticed. Ultimately, Jill, that's the mother, permitted DCF investigators into the living room area of the home, but did not allow them access to any additional areas. Here's what really jumped out to me. Observations included biological children watching television or playing, while non-biological children were engaged in chores. That's a huge red flag for me. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. What do we know about the foster adopted children here? What do we know about them? Here to help us, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas down in Florida, and author and nationally certified mental health counselor Sharonda Brown. All right, Cody, what do we know about the children, specifically the ethnicity of the non-biological children?
Well, Vinny, of those 9 minors removed from the home, of course, we know 4 of them were the adopted/foster children. Of course, there's still some unclear details there. But I did ask the sergeant about the ethnicities and about whether he knew whether they were, white, black, Latino, Asian American. This is what he had to say.
Do we know the ethnicities or anything of the foster/adopted children at all? Do we know that?
That's something I would have to verify.
Okay.
I do believe that there were multiple ethnicities involved, so not just one, but I don't know the exact breakdown of the demographics.
So, Vinny, you heard him there. He was a little unclear, but he said multiple ethnicities were involved. And, of course, we know the allegation here has to do with those foster kids working or doing an abnormal amount of chores compared to those other biological children. But when we take a look back at that redacted charge report, it has a statement from that mandatory reporter at that LDS church. The statement says, during their follow-up at the church, DCF staff contacted Stephanie Kirby, who reported additional concerns about the Griffith children. Mrs. Kirby stated that the family had recently relocated from Arizona to Florida with foster children in their care. Mrs. Kirby explained that the Griffith family primarily fosters or adopts African-American children and expressed concerns that these foster/adoptive children are being treated unfairly. Vinnie goes on to say DCF reported that Mrs. Kirby believes that these foster/adoptive children act as workers and not family members. So Vinnie, yet to be officially confirmed by law enforcement, but these are still some very atrocious, very egregious allegations here in those regards.
Sharonda Brown, I think saying workers is a kind way. It seems like they're trying to adopt children into slavery. If these allegations are true, that you're adopting children to do the chores and do the work around the house, perhaps get abused along the way, while the biological children watching TV, playing games, playing with their cell phones, and wow.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first studied the case, the first question I had was, how do you know the difference between who was the biological and who were the non-biological children? And so that was the first thing I thought of. And unfortunately, we do see it very common where people of one race will adopt children of another race, and then they'll play out their fantasies, their racism, their mistreatment, their maltreatment. And sometimes it goes under the radar because most people do not see children of color as a priority. And so when I'm looking at these type of cases, yes, initially it definitely can make someone angry. But then when you think about racism itself being a mental illness, you begin to go a little further into, well, people who are racist will definitely do things like that if that is the case. So I'm not shocked, but it's definitely unfortunate.
Let's talk about the children. If in fact this is true, again, this was the observations of one person. We'll see what investigators come up with. We'll see what prosecutors come up with and what happens here. But if this is true, what have these 4 children gone through if they've treated basically as labor, as forced labor inside this home and now have to grow up into adulthood? What does this do to them?
The unfortunate part about children who have been traumatized, if you've already been in foster care or you've been neglected, you become familiar with the abuse or neglect. We don't know what type of environment the children were taken from, but in a lot of these cases, the children become very familiar with the abuse to the point that they get used to it. And that's the part that's very sad, that a lot of times they don't even realize that they're in very abusive situations because it's what they were born into. So part of the work is going to be teaching them that what they went through was not okay, helping them get educated, helping them become safe, and helping them realize that even when they're not in the environment, that no one's going to hurt them, because that part is going to be a journey for them for the rest of their lives, is looking over their shoulders, not trusting people, not making friends, or sometimes being maybe more clingy than others for the sake of having someone feel safe or to be comfortable with.
Yeah, to me, the trust is the big part, right? When you're a child, and you know these foster children and children are being adopted are just hoping, I want my forever family, right? We hear that all the time, my forever family. And your forever family allegedly turns you into forced labor. And while you're there, you're seeing your brothers and sisters playing, watching TV, enjoying their childhood. Wow. Sharonda Brown, great to have you on the program. Thank you so much. Cody Thomas, Cody on the case, getting it done. Again, thank you. You know, folks, in cases like this, there are several places to point the finger, right? You can, family services, that don't get distracted. It 100% starts with the adoptive parents. They allegedly set all this in motion, engaged in the conduct, and tried to hide it from the rest of the world. Their alleged conduct is what caused the harm here. The question is, will anyone else be held responsible? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.